I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Ryan Graves, former Navy pilot, AIAA Community Chair, and Quantum Technology Project Manager. Ryan has worked in advanced technology operations for over 10 years, including experience with BAE Systems FAST Lab and his current role at GenMat. Prior to that, was twice deployed in support of Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Inherent Resolve as an FA-18 Super Hornet pilot. Ryan has gained media attention as one of the Navy pilots coming forward to speak about their UAP experiences, which he joins us to discuss today. So Ryan, welcome. I think that everyone is excited to learn about your UAP experiences, but before we get that, I want to get into some background. You've got a lot of technology experience, first at BAE Systems FAST Lab, developing new tech in conjunction with DARPA, AFRL, and other research institutions. But you're currently working at Quantum Generative Materials to accelerate the creation of breakthrough materials and tech through quantum algorithms. Can you tell me a little bit about these current roles?
Yeah, absolutely. And first off, Tim, thanks for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure. Starting at my current role now at Quantum Generative Materials, or GenMat. GenMat is a quantum technologies company. You hear a lot of quantum computing. We're looking to take advantage of that quantum computing, and the area that we're focusing initially is really around the many-body problem and our ability to kind of move the state of the art beyond our current ability to predict material properties, design materials. It's in the silicon industry, manufacturing industries. It's kind of hit or miss when you're looking for new materials. It's our contention that we'll be able to develop a system that will allow us to design materials based on needed properties with our algorithms and our AI. So we're kind of working in that post-density functional theory, DFT world, bridging the gap before we have a true high quality, low error quantum computer that we can take advantage of. So that's the gap we look to bridge. My previous job at BAE Systems FAST Labs, that's kind of their advanced technology group within their electronics sector. And within there, I was in their autonomy control estimation group. And once again, within there, their planning and autonomous control technologies group. And so what my role was there was essentially to use my tactical experience and my general understanding of high tech based off of my experiences in the jet and just, my professional life in order to develop capabilities in conjunction with DARPA and AFRL, looking, at the 10, 15-year horizon. I worked in a lot of programs such as Air Combat Evolution 1, which was a program sponsored by DARPA to have an autonomous dogfighting capability in a jet. So that's kind of one example where I was responsible for winning that program. And then I functioned essentially as FAST Lab's principal investigator, working a team of engineers in order to actually accomplish our objectives there.
Okay. Well, the reason I wanted to start out with those is, especially on the UAP issue, I think the fact that you have technology experience and expertise, I think that's highly relevant, right? Because I think it helps provide context for your experience, and it helps demonstrate that you have knowledge of what cutting edge technologies are, so you're able to better identify them and stuff like that. Now, so the other thing I want to stress for the audience is your qualifications as naval aviator. Again, you're a former FA-18 Super Hornet pilot, qualified as a combat lead, head landing signals officer, forward air controller, and as a rescue mission commander. So I should definitely thank you for your service. And also, I'm wondering if you could share a bit about your background in naval aviation with me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined the Navy right out of college. I joined via Officer Candidate School, or OCS, and I essentially signed up to be a pilot. I applied as a pilot. So if I didn't get in, I would have, applied again. That was kind of the advantage of going OCS. So I went in, I applied as a pilot, I got in, succeeded through Officer Candidate School, ended up in Pensacola, Florida, where I met my future wife, like many a naval aviator. Went through my initial training in Pensacola, Florida, and then I was shipped out to Corpus Christi, Texas, where I did my primary flight training in the T-45. It's now being flown in the T-6, but it was right prior to that transfer. I was fortunate enough out of that training to get selected for jets. It's really, the needs of the Navy, what's available versus, our desires, of course. They came, I distinctly remember there was about 12 of us in our class, and about 80% or so wanted jets, called tailhook at the time. The alternatives were helicopters, and some big wings, kind of like P-30s. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but this particular class, they just were a jet heavy class. The instructor came in, he said, well, here's your first lesson in the Navy, is that you don't always get what you want. And then they just said, and they actually called my name first, Ryan Graves, Marina, Mississippi, tailhook. And then that was the only jet picked for that class. So I got extremely fortunate, that particular selection. And it's just, it's the needs of the Navy at the end of the day. So then I went to Marina, Mississippi, where I trained in the T-45 Charlie. And that took me into my jet for the first time, into a T-45 Goshawk, which is a single engine, just slightly subsonic aircraft that we do aircraft carrier landings on. We drop dummy bombs. We do our first dogfighting in, so it's a pretty capable jet, but it is still just a trainer. Once I graduated from there, I went to VFA 106, the RAG, or Fleet Replacement Squadron, for the F-18 Super Hornet. I was there for a year. I finished up priority alpha, which means I was eligible to go directly to a deployed squadron, and I did just that and joined VFA 11, the Red Rippers, mid-deployment in 2012 while they were engaged in Afghanistan. I think I flew my first combat mission about a week and a half or 2 weeks after I finished my my RAG training.
Yeah. So you have a lot, I mean, and again, I want to stress that for the audience, you have a lot of experience. You did, you were deployed twice, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's really just my kind of training background. Once I got to the fleet, I was a landing signal officer. So one of my jobs was I would literally be responsible for the safe and expeditious recovery of aircraft behind the boat. I had a team of LSOs. I was responsible for training them up, for, no kidding, picking up the radio and talking those guys down behind the boat, as well as training new LSOs to do that as well. I was the forward air controller airborne, which is a qualification 2 or 3 air crew in a squadron may get. And essentially would allow me to take operational control of a certain airspace and to utilize other assets such as artillery, naval gunfire, other F-18s, other assets in order to orchestrate strikes in a combat zone. And then my rescue mission commander training was a follow of the forward air controller. So you should pick 1 or 2 of the forward air controller crews in the entire air wing to go through this rescue mission commander training. And essentially it's an advanced large force strike, or I say accelerated large force strike training exercise, where myself, my WISO would be responsible for about 20 F-18s, a lot of other air assets, rescue teams, helicopters, and we'd be doing simulated rescues with pilots that were actually on the ground. So we'd fight our way in, fight our way out, the helicopter rescue, and we'd be orchestrating it the whole way. It was a super privilege to do. It was an incredible experience to be able to do that. But yeah, it was a blast.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so this really, again, I'm trying to set the stage for UAPs. I want to move on to that next. But so you've got the background. I mean, you have the naval aviation background. You in spades. You have tons of it. And again, thank you so much for your service to our country. You've got the technology knowledge, right? And so I think where most people who are familiar with you, where they kind of come into this was CBS 60 Minutes. And what you told CBS was you saw UAPs every day for at least a couple of years in restricted airspace off the Atlantic coast. So I'm wondering, could I kind of start with that experience? And could you tell me a little bit more about what you meant or what you saw?
Yeah, sure. So I regret using the word saw, and I only say that because for me, the jet is an extension of our bodies when we're up there, once we strap in. But, when we say saw, I'm including all our sensors and capabilities on the jet itself. So when we were initially flying, when I initially got to VFA 11, as I said, we were on deployment. When we came back, we ended up going through a maintenance cycle because our jets were one of the few aircraft that were plumbed for the proper coolant flow and whatever electronics are needed for the AISA radar upgrade. Not a fresh install of an AISA, but an AISA upgrade. There's only a few squadrons that were slated for that. So we were flying at, some days with the APG-73, and then later in the day we'd be flying with the APG-79. And that's not particularly rare. It's rare in the fleet, but that's what happens in the fleet replacement squadron all the time, is that you fly different jets with different radars. So it's not that, special, but it was interesting that at this time for us, we'd be in the jet and we would not see anything in the area, right? We'd see our wingmen and we'd have them in the data link, which is, just shared data. We have it from our own jet information, such as a radar. And, on our situational awareness page, or really just a moving map, right? We have a little box essentially drawn over the area that we're supposed to essentially belong in, right? That we've scheduled and we've checked into, and we have the right to be there. And we're maintaining something called MARSA, which is military assumes responsibility for separation of aircraft. And so these working areas out there aren't necessarily restricted space per se, but they are military MOAs. And if you're in there and there's F-18s in there, people are going to be yelling at you. You don't just kind of like wander through it accidentally. The difference between that and a restricted airspace is really more of the repercussions you face when you land, right? So like, it's not like a restricted airspace has an aerial fence around it, right? Or there's like fighter jets waiting to go. I'm sure that's the case some places, but it's just more of like you're really done screwed up now versus, you went in the wrong area and didn't know there was jets in there. So, we know who's supposed to be in those areas, right? We have all the systems to tell us who's in there, because being able to tell who is who in the zoo, as we like to say, is one of the primary responsibilities we have. Because if you think about it, our radar screen, our SA page, I mean, that's our barrel of our sight, that's our gun. So when we select targets on that and we're receiving information from offboard sensor platforms or from, radar controllers on a E2D, we have to take that information, correlate that on our radar, because, it's us, putting the barrel up onto a jet. And so it's incredibly important, as you can imagine, to make sure that we understand exactly who is who there. So, when we go in with the APG-79 and all of a sudden we start seeing all these different radar contacts that weren't there in another aircraft, it's definitely a, hey, what's going on here situation that should not be happening. There are times when there will be false tracks in the older radars, typically, such as for weather or, perhaps some weird reflections, but the AESA radars weren't supposed to be susceptible to that type of interference. But, that was our natural assumption, was that these were most likely some, false tracks. When we point our radar at something, all our sensors look at it for the most part. So, eventually someone had one of these locked up and they were near enough that they actually were able to pick up on their FLIR that there was energy emanating from that spot that the radar was pointing at. So at this point now, it's been holy smokes, there are physical objects here. We can't assume these are just, false tracks now if we're looking out there and seeing energy coming from that spot in the sky. And so that was actually a little scary, right? Because, there's people flying out there with a different radar system. It's like, are these things, we're actively avoiding these things, whereas only, maybe 50% of the squadron can see them, right? So a little nerve wracking there. Eventually, we did actually see them with our own eyeballs. People, of course, once they saw something there, they would try to fly up to them. Just yesterday, in the intelligence committee hearing, we saw how they showed an example of how fast a pass can be. Right, there was a video, it's just one frame with an object in it, perhaps 2 frames, but we would fly by and look for these objects. And although they do go quick, that's exactly what we're trained to do. We go to a merge with another jet. We're looking to see if the air is condensing around their wings, if their flaps are automatically scheduling down, like if their AOA is high, so they're low energy. Like, these are things we're looking for. And so to come to a merge and have all our sensors locked on something and have a circle in our JHEMX helmet to show us where to look and then not see anything, is disconcerting, to say the least. But then just so happens that a squadron mate of mine was flying with their wingman out to the working areas that I've been describing. And you always enter at a certain geographical spot and you exit at the same spot, but at a lower altitude, right? So it's like crossing traffic like this. Then these guys go home, these guys enter the area. And that's how it goes. Those are called the working rules for the area. Every working space in the military has one. My friend, my squadron mate, was flying out to the area. He was at that entrance point, and one of these objects went right between him and his wingman, his other aircraft. I I have a contention, although I don't have this data, that his radar wasn't working, because he would not have flown directly into the object if his radar was. So I wonder if perhaps neither of the objects, either the jet or the object knew that the other was there, perhaps because it wasn't putting energy into the contact. But either way, there was an object right at the entrance to that working area and split their section. And he came back to squadron. And had a look of shock on his face, and I'm still in his gear, which is never good if someone's sitting in the ready room with their gear on, because it means something went really wrong, or something, someone crashed, or who knows. But he was just like, I almost hit one of those damn things, he's just like, everyone's like, well, what did it look like? And he just described it as like a dark gray cube or black cube inside of a clear sphere somehow that was touching the circumference, or the inner circumference of the sphere there. So, but I don't know what a clear sphere looks like, right? What that really translates to in reality, because if it's perfect clear, you wouldn't actually see it. So translucent, I guess, would maybe be a better word.
Yeah, so a kind of a dark gray cube and kind of a clear sphere, and then again in Washington Post, when they talked about this, I believe you'd said that these things had no exhaust plume, no visible engine, and then on one occasion appeared to be kind of hovering, if that's correct.
Most of the time they'd be hovering. Yeah. Most of
okay.
the time they would be hovering, just staying in a single location. When I say hover, typically when you think of a hover, there's two things. There's either kind of I'm staying in one spot over the ground, or I'm kind of just going with the wind at a constant altitude. One is much harder than the other, right? And these things would typically be stationary over the ground, regardless of the winds, which was, interesting, because even if you're in an aerial vehicle, you're usually bobbing around to some degree. It's not that precise, but these things just kind of seem planted there, in some sense, which was interesting. But we would see them, flying around 0.6, 0.8 Mach, doing just kind of random directions. The times I would see them faster, 1.1, 1.2 Mach, would typically, or I think exclusively, I saw them heading east or southeast towards the ocean. Never saw them transiting west towards the land. Never picked them up on the radar over land. Strictly east of the land.
Okay. And yeah, and this is incredibly valuable information. You're jumping around on my questions a little bit, so if I get lost,
Sorry.
that's on me. But so one of the things I wanted to ask was, did the UAPs that you encountered respond to you or other naval aircraft in any way? Did they attempt to pace you, evade, or maintain a distance, or anything along those lines?
Not to me personally. I have not had that experience. The only reaction that I've suggested, I don't necessarily have evidence, but one of the theories I have is that coming to that merge that I described, right, with the object and the jet, I have a bubble around me, essentially, where anything down here I can't see really, but anything up here is like I'm looking at the sky, right? And so it's hard to tell as you're coming up to this object so fast. You're trying to go slow, but you're going up to it quickly. Just a slight descent from it will get it out of your vision pretty quick. And it was just hard to tell, was it moving in close? Was it, it's just difficult because we could just never see them. I mean, I dozens of pilots that visually went out and tried to see them, and I know only a handful that were successful.
Oh, okay. Well, so I want to try and contrast this to the well-known Nimitz battle group encounter south of California coast, because those have gotten so much publicity. I think people have studied the heck out of those. So in those, some pretty remarkable UAP flight performance was measured, including what appears to be speeds of, and again, I think this was radar descent on Kevin Day's systems for the most part, but they'd estimated that at around 24,000 miles per hour. So in your encounters, I think you just mentioned top speed of something like Mach 6.8, but it was what kind of flight performance, I guess, did you see displayed from these things? What are the capabilities appear to be?
Yeah, so what we would like, I would typically see them stationary, or what we would see is operating somewhere in the 0.6 to 0.8 Mach. So what that translates somewhere around maybe 250 to 350 knots. And then that's all well and good, not that sexy, right? But they'll be out there all day, right? For a tactical jet like ourselves, we can maintain that, depending on what side of the range they're, for maybe 2 hours, right? And then they would be at that range, and then they would, Yeah, 1.1, 1.2 Mach. I didn't see them go from like 0.6 and then accelerate out to like 1.2 Mach. I wish I did, but we're out there doing our mission, and as we're looking at our screen, our radar, we happen to maybe go 180 degrees out, and now I'm getting flashes of them over here doing something, and then we're turning back over here. So it's not like we're just sitting there studying them for like a long period of time. I think people sometimes have that misconception, in hindsight, right? Like it's like, it'd be like, yeah, let's go out and like think of all the data we could have got, but at the time, it's always just like, 95 to 99% of your mental capacity is being used to do your mission and to, operate safely. That just gets filed away as a safety consideration. It doesn't get filed into some curiosity bucket, that we have time or space or energy for.
Well, yeah, no, I think it's really important that you point that out. I think a lot of people miss this. It's something that we know, but I think that we kind of miss, which is that these are, and I think this probably applies to the military in general. These are exceptions, right? I mean, you have your job that you're trying to do, and this would be across the military as a whole. You've got a mission, you've got your job, you've got your duties, and then something happens, and it's an exception, and I think for the people who are studying and reporting these, right, like the UAP task force and stuff, I think that's one of the things that makes their job so difficult is, even though these get, in hindsight, these get the press, at the time, they're exceptions to a normal process, and they don't get, the reporting isn't necessarily there and all sorts of stuff like that. So I think that's really worth pointing out. It's like you said, your mental capacity is focused on something else, and then all of a sudden something happens. So,
And yeah, it's a very important point, and it was mentioned at the hearings just the other day. As enthusiastic as the Department of Defense may or may not be about this, at the end of the day, their mission is very clear, and any science that they may or may not do is for a particular goal, right? So they made it very clear themselves that they really have to treat this as a threat. They're not an exploratory organization. They're not incentivized that way. So in my opinion, I think that one of the best things we can do moving forward is to, we can't get away from the reality that the military currently has the best sensor technology. That's just the fact of the matter. And that's where the data is going to be held. So if the Department of Defense recognizes that they're not the right people to do science, which I think is, I don't think anyone's going to say that's a controversial take, right? That's why we have NASA. That's why we have other organizations, the National Science Foundation. We need to be able to take that data, and we need to be able to break it apart and decompose it down until it's unclassified, so that we can spread the science out to the organizations that can actually do science and allow the defense for the Department of Defense.
Yeah. Well, and what you're describing, so I mean, these things, and again, I'm just kind of going down my list of questions here, but this so far, what you've described, this sounds artificial. It sounds like an artificial object, maybe a vehicle or something like that. But I mean, you're describing, and this was what I was going to ask next. So you've got radar tracks, you've got FLIR, you've got visual confirmation, and then I think one of the other things that's interesting is, as you've said, these objects were stationary, and sometimes, or they were moving. They're not moving with the wind. They're obviously not like weather balloons or something like that, So I mean, you've got all of the hallmarks of real, concrete, physical objects, and these physical objects are moving under their own power, and they're not doing it conventionally. That's, I mean, that's kind of my take on what you've told me so far.
Yeah, I know it's very common for people to think about, they go to assumptions like balloons and things of that nature, but 25, 30,000 feet, we don't get party balloons up there, just hang out. Like those things don't go up that high. So, we also need to consider that if there are things up there, right, that, what that leads to isn't just that, okay, well, it must be aliens. And it's that if something's up there, like it's worth our attention. Like that's really the point, right? Whether it's something that fits into the other category, or whether it's some type of collection operation by a foreign country, like, we should be asking questions about our security if there's things operating in that range right off our coast and our military ranges.
Yeah. Well, it actually, that was, again, I was going to ask about that. Let me come back to that one
I
a little bit later
subconsciously
on.
got your questions in my head, I guess.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Well, what I wanted to ask next was, because these encounters happened repeatedly over time, and I thought this was really interesting, right? And this goes to the exceptions part of it, because again, with a lot of this stuff, it happens and then it's done and then it's gone, and you're left asking all these kind of questions. But since yours happened repeatedly over time, I was wondering if you noticed any common patterns, right? Like time of day or flight paths or geographic location. I think you mentioned that they didn't seem to go over land, they seemed to focus on the ocean.
Yeah, so it's a great question. One thing that I have an uncertainty about is collection bias. So, are the, AESA jets in an F-18 off the training ranges seeing UAPs that are there, or are they just seeing, they're seeing what's, distributed more broadly, yet they have the detection capabilities there, right? So I think to preface this conversation, we have to acknowledge that the data we have is coming from a narrow subset. So pattern recognition may be difficult. And, I think that should be a goal of, efforts in the future in order to broaden the domain of understanding across, the continental United States as well as the coast. And I think, bringing in other agencies is going to be key to that. I forgot the context of the original question, although I had the setup there.
Oh,
Please remind
yeah.
me.
Well, no, it's just basically patterns.
Patterns. So so to say that, so to preface it with that, right? The things that we would see is that, yes, they weren't overland. I would see them going fastest when they were kind of just barreling east out over the ocean. We would see them kind of just east. I mean, they weren't like they were only in our area, and then they weren't like, I would see them kind of working their way east, right? So like there was traffic going this way. It wasn't just like they're in this one box and that was it, right? We'd see them kind of circular patterns, more extended racetrack patterns. We'd see them perfectly stationary. We'd see them kind of doing one of these or just kind of drifting up, right? So we'd see them climbing or descending or vice versa, right? They'd just kind of be doing like one of these up and down. So there'd be some like three-dimensional variability in the maneuvering, not just in the horizontal axis. And so like, what is this all, what is the pattern? I don't know. But it was, it was strange. It wasn't just like one particular speed, it wasn't like super fast and then stationary, right? Like a go and a stop, right? It was less organized than that, I would say. And ultimately you don't know what the objective is, right? So that's what could be difficult with like, one of the things I worked on a little bit at BAE was, swarms, things of that nature, right? And being able to tell the objective what a swarm is focusing on, its attention on, is different than trying to understand what a single sensor is focusing on, right? And so when we do start to maybe perhaps look at this in a broader context as swarm behavior versus the actions of individuals, maybe the patterns will become more clear. I have, just to continue though, I have seen, visual confirmation, I'll say, of similar objects in different areas, right, by similar aircraft. So, up in the Pax River area, closer to Washington, a friend of mine was flying up there, had a radar contact, and basically was flying along. He saw it there, and then he was like setting up for his test, and he wasn't on his radar anymore. And then he caught a visual of something, and he basically spotted what on his eye was like paralleling his jet, and then it just kind of went up and out of his view, and it just looked similar to how I've already described it with the cube and the sphere, so I have heard of the appearance being similar across the coast and in different training ranges or pattern goes.
Well, so another thing that it kind of intrigued me was, I've heard, I can't confirm this, but I've heard that the recent spate of UAP encounters, right? And I think this is probably the Nimitz one. These came largely after equipment upgrades in the early 2000s, and I've heard it suggested that might indicate UAP cloaking from older aircraft sensors. I'm wondering, did you ever see any indications of stealth or radar jamming or electronic countermeasures, ECM type stuff?
I never witnessed any emissions from any of the objects other than IR energy. So no indications of jamming or communication, I would say, just no energy essentially at all other than IR energy, which was unmodulated, right? Just continuous, not like a signal or anything like that. It's just like a output. So yeah, that's all I have. I guess the answer is
Okay.
no.
Okay. No, it's interesting. I just wondered. I believe, in fact, I think that in the hearings they'd mentioned this, that there were emissions detected, but I don't think they were specific about what those were. So
That could be a lot of stuff, and that could be stuff that maybe even my jet's not detecting, or who knows? It could be a lot of different things. And it can also potentially be, a bounce back of the radar. It's bouncing off the object, and the object's doing something to that signal, and it's coming back and it's looking different. And that coming back is a shifted Doppler, right? Theoretically, unless, AISA will just pretend it's a Doppler radar, but, it comes back and it looks different. It's been shifted. And the system may or may not display that as jamming, but it could just simply be the effects of whatever the object is, or how it's being propulsed, or
oh, I see
whatever,
what you
right?
mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
So something could be misinterpreted, right? They could say, okay, this is an emission, or this looks like ECM, or who
The
knows
jet's
what.
only has like a very narrow amount of stuff it's going to display, right? It's either jamming or it's not. It's not like it's like
Yeah.
interesting data, but it's not jam, right? Like, so we don't see that. So it's going to be called jamming, but who knows what that really is, right?
That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah. And and again, I don't think in the hearings, which is probably where I got most of my information, I don't think they ever said jamming. I think they just said they detected emissions, and that could include what you just described. It could just be kind of a steady state IR output. So, but one of the reasons I kind of asked about that was, I was trying to go towards the possible intent of these UAPs. I mean, did you get the impression? I know this sounds odd because they seem artificial, and it seems like they're, again, they're flying under power. But did you ever get the impression that they were under intelligent control? Did you ever have any thoughts about what they might want, or why they might be interacting with our naval forces in the way they have been?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? There's just so many assumptions you have to draw, and they're just all very heavy assumptions. And not only do we have to draw assumptions, we're also dealing with something that inherently may not be logical to us, right? Like, if we want to look like at the far end of the spectrum, right? So, it's difficult to say, but I think really what's going to help us, have a better understanding of that next layer, right, of the tactical implications of their maneuvering, right? If we can zoom out a bit and have a better understanding of how these objects are moving in a group, or how they're working perhaps as a swarm, there are some ways of potentially inferring what their intent is, or what their main objective or look area or something of that nature potentially. But to be able to do that layer of data, at the AIAA, that's one area we're considering, but it requires more data than we have right now, which is why we've been pleading to people that are in Congress and the Senate that have supported the NDAA amendments to hopefully come and support our efforts there to help us unlock some of that.
Yeah. Well, the reason I'd asked about that, and this is probably the only, I would say that this is the only paranoid question that I have. This is the only one, but this did occur to me, and this came after reading the Nimitz encounters, is that, on a cultural basis, I think when we think of UAP, or the older term UFO, right? I mean, the one that I always think of is, something touches down in this rural cornfield and picks up a farmer, and there's nobody around to, you've got one person doing testimony. But the reality of UAPs is these encounters appear to be happening off the coast in proximity to major population centers. And that strikes me as really intriguing, especially since these are happening in crowded airspace and near major shipping lanes, right? So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's tough to tell, right? Because again, most of our large population centers are located on the coast, so it kind of gets back to that bias. I would love to see, and I think the UAP task force even had mentioned this, right? That they didn't have the data inside the continental US that they did along the coast, right? I will say that, I've heard through some of my friends that are still flying that, these are being detected, further inland. They're just being detected at places inland that jets fly and have the detection capabilities. So,
Okay.
So again, it goes right back to, are they hanging out by that base, or are they, are the jets seeing them because the jets are there? So,
Yeah. No, that, and actually that makes complete sense. This is unrelated. Wasn't one of my questions, but there was a university team that did a really detailed analysis of UFO reports, and somebody had given this to me. I believe it's published online. I just remember the address. And so they gave this to me a few years ago, and not surprisingly, the vast majority of UFO reports historically are near airports, right? Which, because again, the interesting ones, I guess, as they say, are something like 1 in several thousand, and a lot of them are just misreported landing lights, So that would kind of go along the same lines, right? Of you're going to see them where the jets are, and you've got a lot of activity off the coasts.
Yes, it depends, on what your definition is of off the coast, right? Because when we're talking about our working areas, they're starting 10 miles off the coast. So the only people that should be operating any type of like UAVs would be like your maybe like one-off boat or like fisherman guy that's like down below like 3,000 feet or so. I wouldn't be expecting to like continuously see a swarm of aerial vehicles day and night, right? So day and night, and when I said every day earlier, again, we weren't tracking them, but we were accustomed to them so much that we put a notice out to airmen. It's called NOTAM, and it's something a pilot checks basically every time they go flying to an airport to say what's broken at the airport, what's wrong with it. The runway's down, the lights are out. We had one to say that there was unknown objects in our working area that we didn't know where they're from, right? So, I mean, that you can kind of see the frustration there that they just didn't know how to handle it.
Yeah. Well, how often? I mean, I'm guessing pilots. You mentioned the fellow in his gear, right? But pilots see more than they talk about, probably even with each other, and even less of that gets officially reported. How often do you think that these events might happen to naval pilots in general? And does it damage, or is it still damaging a pilot's reputation to report those?
The sense I'm getting, to skip ahead, is that it's no longer as damaging, but it's a community that's driven by tradition, right? And there's actually a tradition of this in this community. Like I remember when I was very new to that community, talking to old guys, and they all had their stories, and some of them it was, hey, Jerry's got a story, but he ain't gonna tell you about it, but some guys would, and they were all interesting, but no one really was like digging into it. And it was all kind of just like, all right, it wasn't serious. But when we're almost hitting these things out there, it's a lot different than seeing something perhaps in distance or on the radar. But every day that we're now briefing them as a safety consideration in our briefs, it takes it from the kind of like, oh, legendary stories we used to have to I need to make sure that my new wingman in the squadron, who just came from the RAG, understands that there's objects out there that he could hit, like that he may not be aware of, like an actual safety consideration that we need to make sure that we brief new pilots to. So it became extremely pragmatic of an issue for us.
Yeah, well, and I think that was exactly what was expressed in the hearings also, is that it's a safety concern, it's an unknown. I mean, there are a lot of practical, real reasons to understand what's going on, in addition to larger scientific needs. And I think that's the reason one of the reasons that the military is beginning to take these things more seriously, and it looks like they're at least attempting to remove some of the stigma that's been associated with reporting encounters. Do you think that stigma is going away? Do you think that their efforts are at least partially successful? And do you have any ideas on what they could do to address this more directly?
Yeah, I think it is going away, but I think generally speaking, they're going about it the wrong way. It needs to be a comprehensive data collection and analysis effort that goes, that's not gatekept by whether the pilot just has enough time that day, right? we need to be able to ensure that the sensors that we're using to look at the coast, in order to protect our country, we have a system in place to ensure that what we're seeing isn't harmful to our country, isn't a strategic risk, isn't, a tactical assault in some fashion, as people are listening to our tactics or waveforms in order to get some type of tactical advantage against us, right? So, we have to be cognizant of the fact that those threats exist out there, and that, we have to presume that, that's the reality. Not to say it's an adversarial tact we need to take, but we have to have confidence in our military that the leadership cares about what our aircrew and our operators are actually seeing out there when they report it back. And if the leadership isn't showing that they care, then at the end of the day, the operators, aren't going to waste their time with it. So the leadership needs to continue to express it, and not just at the very top, but at the middle, so at the 05, 06 level, that's where the support needs to come from. And I fear that that's likely maybe one of the hardest cohorts to turn over, because it's a group of aviators that have been doing their job for a while. They haven't quite pulled into the Pentagon quite yet, so they're highly experienced and a lot of times set in their ways, perhaps with the larger hours. So why change things now? But I think that's really where the push would have to be.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be, again, UFO related, right? Like we should understand what potential threats are off our coast. We can't pretend like we're just, invisible to the rest of the world, and invincible to the rest of the world as well.
Yeah, well, just total information awareness, right? And that would pick up UAPs. It's just we want to know what's going on, in every square centimeter of that airspace, and for safety reasons and defense reasons and every reason, right? So
if we don't do it now, it's going to be a continued problem, right? So fast forward 10 years when we have magnitudes more small form factor UAV traffic, right? We need to have the systems in place to, one, ensure that those can operate safely with either existing or new air infrastructure in place. And two, it's secure from attack, right? If we have thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of UAVs, supporting customers and delivering packages and, transplanting hearts across the country, we don't want people taking advantage of the infrastructure and using that to attack us, right? So we need to have total awareness of that domain early, because it's going to get away from us if we don't, in my opinion.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for sharing your story. Let me close by asking, what comes next for you personally? And what do you anticipate seeing with the UAP story in general as it continues to unfold?
Yeah, for myself right now, I'm really focused on two efforts. Quantum generative materials. I am, really excited about the technology we're building there. It's been almost a year now since I've joined the company, and we're really excited to talk more about what we've been doing here in the near future. And I've also been working with the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. They asked me to help them stand up a committee at the national level in order to bring the various technical committees and integration groups at the AIAA across the country, and bring those technical folks together in order to be ready to answer hard technical questions, to be able to interpret data, to be a trusted neutral source where we can be able to answer those questions across the military industrial complex, across the aerospace industry. We'll have access to all 30,000 plus of those engineers. And as we've been reaching out to them, they've been incredibly supportive, right? It's a all volunteer type activity, and the emails back and support from everywhere from NASA to Lockheed Martin to Boeing, folks that are in this industry. There's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of excitement about this, and I think the stigma in the industry is perhaps subsiding a bit as well.
Wonderful. Ryan, thank you again, sir.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, Tim.